It's monstrous to us because we don't think that way, but other people may think differently. There's a crisis of confidence in America today, and we see this on all levels, and this kind of feeds into the sort of the rise of the Glenn Becks and what have you, and the kind of hysteria. And this is because we're sort of panicked that we can't trust anything. The media in the lowest esteem it's been in, the government, certainly the financial system, and on and on and on. And because of this, there is not only a crisis, but a tremendous opportunity. There's a tremendous opportunity for journalists to show what we can do and to regain, to win the public's trust. Unfortunately, there is tremendous pressure on journalists not to pursue certain stories. And I'm not talking about necessarily an organized effort. If it was an organized effort, it would be maybe something that we could do something about or at least identify. It's much more insidious than that. And I don't remember the exact phrasing I use in Family of Secrets. If you read it, you may know, where I talk about this kind of quiet thing that I covered totalitarian and authoritarian societies, the fall of communism and so forth. And one of the things you see is that most people kept the system, helped preserve the system, not because they were told to do it, but simply because they were afraid. And there was this sort of self-censorship. And this exists throughout all societies, and it exists, to my mind, in the most insidious form in a society like ours where we bray about how free we are. That is where you see most of that. Because if you're proud of yourself and how green your lawn is and how well you generally do investing and how cool NASCAR is and everything else, and you're telling your kids and you take them for 5 minutes to Valley Forge and then it's on to the consumerism plunge at the outlet mall, you really don't want to hear that everything ain't hunky-dory. And so there is this kind of pressure on ourselves to not talk about things that matter, and then on other people, shut up. We don't want to talk about that. An earlier speaker urged you, I thought he was very eloquent, I think it was Manny Badillo, and he said, read, read. And, you know, I love that because people, I do a lot of, radio shows and things, and people always say to me, well, this is so depressing. What can we do? And what can we do about it? We're just, one person or something. And I say, well, first of all, almost everything meaningful that happened in history was one person. Almost every cure, almost every scientific advancement, Amazon and Microsoft and rockets and everything else. I mean, basically started with one person. So every single person in this room actually holds a tremendous amount of power. You just have to be determined and figure out how to implement that. But reading is an amazing thing because here's a way that you can kind of build personal power in the comfort and privacy of your own home. And I hope to get a little bit more into that. One thing I notice is that most people simply do not have the command of the most elementary facts about our country. And if you talk to them, they get almost everything wrong. To say nothing of the fact that, polls show that, 40-some% of the public can't name, the vice president and things like that. But, I mean, if you take the people who consider themselves better informed, they have the wrong narrative, it turns out, on almost everything. They misunderstand people who were president of the United States, maybe Reagan, let's say, for 8 years. They don't really understand what was going on or who he was. They have wrong impressions of so many different things. And I attribute this largely to the fact that they're not reading enough, or they're all, if you look at the Amazon ratings, they're all rushing out to buy, Sarah Palin's memoirs or something like that. But they're not reading more challenging material, which is out there. And there are tons of great books. They come out all the time. And I've always got huge stacks around my house, and I'm in the middle of reading 4 or 5 of them because there's so much amazing work being done. And we all owe it to ourselves and to our society to be constantly reading and bugging everybody else to read. Okay, so speaking of reading, just out of curiosity, how many of you happen to have heard of Family of Secrets? Probably half. Okay. And how many of you have it or have read it? Okay, it's like 20% or something. Okay. All right. This is a book about a man who was just president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, for 8 incredibly convulsive years. It is a book that has a shocker on every single page. New information that has never been reported before, information that I didn't know until I found it in the course of doing this research. It's so shocking, I am told, that it changes your understanding of major American events, not just during the 8 years he was president, but going back decades. And for example, if you look on the back cover, I don't remember the exact quote, it's from a man named Dan Rather, who was earning, I think, $8 million a year and on top of the world, and then suddenly he was persona non grata over an issue where he was challenging or reporting on something relating to the Bush family. Dan gave me a very nice blurb for the book where he says, this changed my understanding of even events to which I was an eyewitness. And so we have, for those of you who've read it, know 4 or 5 chapters of all new material relating to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Sounds strange for that to be in a book about the Bushes, and I'll try to explain a little bit more about that if we have time. And about Watergate, a few chapters on that, and about Richard Nixon, things that I didn't know and that we didn't know. And Dan had covered these things. You may know he was in Dealey Plaza, and you may know that he was the only reporter who was allowed, as I understand it, to see the famed Zapruder film of Kennedy with the famed head snap. And supposedly, I mean, what he reported was that the head went forward, and we later found it went back. How and why he interpreted it that way, something else. But the fact of the matter is that he believes that Family Secrets has new information, and it's interesting how figures of that power, when they're not anymore ensconced in the establishment, their eyes are opened and they become much more receptive to this. And I actually have heard from a former Secretary of Defense of the United States who said that Family Secrets blew him away, and he said, wow, you're really connecting the dots. And that's interesting to me that somebody at that level would feel that this was something, he didn't know these things. So the premise of Family of Secrets is that there's a completely different history out there, even about the subjects and the people we think we already know everything about. And one of the things we discovered when Family of Secrets came out was that we couldn't get people to read it. And do you know why? There was one refrain, and I'm sure you can guess what it all was. I'm sick of Bush, and I don't want to hear another word about him. I'm moving on, right? Well, how many countries, Pinochet and Hitler and Mussolini or whatever, could people have said, and I'm not making an explicit comparison, but I'm saying where somebody fell out of favor for good reason, there was a rush to the exits. And of course, that's not what you should do. When you discover that something goes terribly wrong with your family or your house, you don't say, I don't want to hear another word about it. You say, I better deal with this and see if the house itself is rotted at its foundations. I better figure this out before the whole bloody thing collapses. So this is what we thought should have happened, but understandably, people didn't know there was anything new in there. They thought, well, it's the same old thing. How many of you have heard of a book by a guy named Scott McClellan? Okay, it's about the same, but if you ask a general audience, it's much higher percentage. Now, he was Bush's communications director, press secretary, and so on. His book came out. He got on every major show. He was on everything. He was on Jon Stewart. He was on from the left to the right and so on. Now, maybe not the right, but he was on everything. And his book had, as I recall, almost no revelations in there. There was like one thing that Bush might have, he might have overheard Bush saying he couldn't remember whether he had smoked marijuana. You remember that? It was like a couple of things. When you have a story about a big subject and you have almost nothing new, but a couple of little things they can tease, you're on all the shows. But if you go out there and you say, hey, folks, we missed everything, they go, gotta go, no time for you. Okay? And that's what happened with this book. Well, originally, I was told by the publisher that they had gotten word. I was supposed to, the Today Show was very interested in having me on, and NPR, some of you may listen to that, Morning Edition, wanted an exclusive, and on and on and on, and the New York Times wanted an advance review copy, specially requested under embargo and so forth, and total silence.